I'd like to make a video now about wage rates on the free market. I was asked to do a video on minimum wage, and I decided that since this would cover that topic and wages more generally, I'd rather do this. People, very few people understand economics well enough, and I'm not saying I'm an expert here. I'm a layman who just has taken some time to read about it. The very few people understand how wages come about and what causes them to be what they are, and so they have all these really weird ideas, and most people basically assume that employers have basically dictatorial power, that they can mandate whatever wages they please, and that the only reason that they can't do that is because the government mandates them to do otherwise. And so this is an extremely widespread belief. Any discussion of the 19th century is going to be replete with, well, things were worse because the government didn't mandate higher wages. If we didn't have minimum wage, then employers would simply lower the wages to nothing, and then examples of low wages are held up as proof that free markets are exploitative and cannot work. And to illustrate all this, a couple of years ago, a very overzealous socialist friend of mine posted an article about a little girl in Bangladesh who worked in an underwear factory, and she made, I don't know, like $1 a day or something like that. And he alleged this proves that free markets are exploitative, and obviously Bangladesh isn't being a good country and mandating higher wages. Now, on a free market, you cannot expect wage rates to stay lower than the actual value of the labor. So for instance, employers, say for instance that this little girl is working for $1 a day, and the underwear that she produces, its value to the underwear company is $5 a day. So what this, and my socialist friend, I guess, would point out, well, look, she's being exploited. She's getting paid $1. What she's doing is actually worth $5. Clearly, exploitation. Well, here's the thing: on a free market, greedy capitalists are always looking for profits, and so greedy capitalists are going to see this factory employing gutter children at $1 a day, and it's going, look, all we have to do is open a factory and hire all these gutter children, and we'll pay them all $1 a day, and we'll make $5 a day off of their labor, and that's very profitable. Profits are going to draw additional producers. Well, what happens is when they start to open factories is two things. A, the supply of these underwear have now increased, which means the market price is likely going to fall, all things being equal, which means instead of the companies all making $5 a day on the labor of these people, of their workers, now they'll only make $4.85, and then $4.50, and then $4. On the other hand, in competition with the other producers, they will do whatever they can to outcompete them, and this will include getting a better labor force. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to bid up wages. So they can say, okay, right now we're only charging $1 a day, it's worth $5 a day, our competitors are all charging $1 a day, we're going to raise our salary by 1 penny. Now, just by that much, we will get more workers. We will get the best workers, because all the workers who are making only $1 a day will look at our dollar and a penny and say, that's worth more. And they'll be able to pick from the best. And so even though they'll be paying slightly more in wages, they will have the best labor force on the market in that industry, which will give them a competitive advantage. And so what happens is the increased supplies brings the price down. The competition for wages bids the prices up, the wages up, and they basically tend toward each other. This doesn't go on forever. Wages will not be bid up to infinity. What they will is once they reach a point where the value of the marginal worker, the marginal value product, is, well, when the wages approach that, then that's when they can no longer really offer higher wages. So on a free market, that's what tends to happen. Now, that doesn't mean everybody always is making that. Some people are going to make more than that for reasons like if there's a big shortage or a sudden change in the market, and before there's time for there to be more firms to adapt, it's possible for some workers to make very high wages, and it's possible for some of them to make lower. But the tendency is for wages to approach what their value is to the producer, and ultimately the value that it is to the producer is also not arbitrary. That's based on the value that customers place on the products that are being made. So wages in a very real sense, are determined by the customers and how much they value what you're producing. Now, what this means is if you're very unskilled, if you don't have a lot of abilities that are deemed valuable by population at large, it's unlikely that you'll command a very high wage. But you will get paid on a free market anyway what people value your services as. Now, if you have a situation where it's not a free market, say where there is no free entry, where not anybody can just start an underwear factory, say in Bangladesh, to go back to this example, the very likely scenario where thanks to bribes or regulatory fiat, only a certain number of firms are allowed to engage in a certain industry, then they don't have to compete for labor because they don't have to worry about competitors. But that would be because there isn't a free market, not because there's a lack of a free market. The other thing, the reason that that the claim that wages are set by government mandate is bogus is because the vast majority of workers make more than government mandated minimums. If indeed employers would cut wages to the absolute barest minimum without the government, then right now everybody should only be making a minimum wage or whatever the mandates are in their industry. And the fact is that almost nobody doesn't. And so for those who believe the government mandates are what cause wages to rise, they have to explain why have wages risen above those levels. And when I asked this socialist friend of mine, this guy who consistently characterizes free markets and capitalists as inherently evil and inherently anti-human and inherently anti-democratic, when I asked him, well, why do so many people make more than the government mandated minimums? What's the reason? And he finally said, well, because some capitalists are nice guys. That contradicts all of his anti-capitalist, anti-entrepreneurial hate speech. B, that's not a satisfactory explanation. Capitalists would try and get pay the lowest wages possible. They will try and do that by and large. And if they don't, it's because they value other things like the charity or what makes them feel good to help their workers, which, by the way, does happen. But they will bid wages down as low as they can. But it doesn't matter. On a free market, they don't have the power to just unilaterally, cut wages to whatever they feel like. Just imagine if we didn't have a government. What if your employer said, well, we're going to pay everybody a penny a day? What do you think would happen if they actually had dictatorial powers on wages, as is alleged? for all those people who claim we need the government to intervene, if that was actually true, then firms would have the power to just say, we're going to pay you a penny a day. Everybody realizes that all of their workers would leave. There's this fallacy, this belief that labor is somehow an infinitely supplyable good, and so they can always fire their workers, no problem, because there'll always be more workers to take their place. This is basically never true. For one, workers will not work. There's something called opportunity cost. So if my best paying job is $10 an hour, but I have other jobs where I can work for $6 or $7 an hour, then I will never accept a wage lower than $6 or $7 an hour. If the place I'm making 10 comes and says you're going to make $1 a day now, I'm going to say I have other jobs I could go to and make more than that, so bye. So they can't lower your wages below that point and not expect to lose all their workers. Even though there are billions of people, that doesn't mean that labor is a homogeneous unit. People have different skills. People who are doctors and who are mechanics are not competing for the lowest skilled jobs. The number of people who are competing for that is a subset of the population, not everybody. And there is not an infinite supply. There's a finite supply. So it just boggles my mind. In all the jobs I've had, when I've quit, they've always begged me not to quit. I've heard of lots of people where when they try and quit, they get offered raises. I'm not saying that's as a rule, but it happens quite often, and the fact that it does demonstrates that employers cannot simply dictate what the wages will be to their employees. There's a give and take there, and ultimately what's determining the ultimate wage level is the value that consumers are placing on the goods that are being produced. Not fiat. It's not the whim of the capitalist. I mean that's the claim, and it's just so absurd. It doesn't even make sense. Capitalists cannot just declare that wages be zero. And the other thing is they'll say, well, they'll form a cartel. And this is true that they will attempt to do this sometimes. Many, many cartels have been formed. So for instance, they might argue, well, wages won't be bid up because all the underwear factories will get together and say, let's all pay a 1 penny wage. Well, ignoring for the fact that then their workers will just go into other industries, and the only way this would logically work would be for a cartel of all industries, which seems very implausible. But even granting that, when cartels form, none of the participants in the cartel are equal. They're not identical. They don't have the same amount of efficiency. They don't have the same profit margins. If they did, then there would be no point in a cartel, because if they were actually the same, they would already be paying the same wages, and they'd already be charging the same and having the same profits. The fact that they're different means that the cartel is going to benefit some at the expense of others. So the most efficient, the most competitive members of a cartel are not gaining as much as they could be as if they were competing. For the weaker members, the weaker firms, they are gaining. They can't compete as well. The fact that they're in a cartel benefits them. But necessarily there are more efficient firms that are hurt by the cartel. And if greed is what drives them to form a cartel in the first place, greed is what will drive them to break the cartel. So usually when people speak of cartels, they speak of them in terms of preventing consumer choice. But if we were talking about labor, it would be the same in principle. Say all the underwear manufacturers get together, say we're only going to charge a penny a day. 2 or 3 of the firms realize that they're more competitive than the other ones, and that if they just drop if they raise their wages slightly, they'll have an even greater competitive advantage. And their greed will compel them to do this, and as soon as they do, the cartel is broken. And historically, this is always what happens. The only way cartels ever last or ever succeed beyond the planning stage is if the government comes and enforces them. So a bit long-winded there, but it needs to be said.